I still remember the exact moment Quillan Thorne looked me dead in the eye and said, "Honestly, Ivory, anyone could do your job. You're easily replaceable." I was 28 then, the lead digital strategist at Northbridge Creative Agency, and I'd just spent 3 years building their entire social media department from scratch. But that cold Tuesday morning in his glass-walled office changed everything. What Quillan didn't realize was that his cruel dismissal would become the biggest mistake of his career. Because the day I walked out of Northbridge Creative with my box of personal items, something extraordinary happened. 3 different people tried to fill my position. 3 people quit within 2 weeks, unable to handle what I'd been managing effortlessly for years. By month's end, their biggest clients were fleeing, their social media campaigns were crashing, and Quillan was desperately calling me, begging me to come back. But I was already busy building something that would destroy his business forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how I got to that devastating moment in Quillan's office will make what happened next so much sweeter. 3 years earlier, I was a different person entirely. Fresh out of graduate school with a master's in digital communications, I was that eager 25-year-old who believed hard work and talent would automatically lead to recognition and success. I had this naive faith that if you just did your job exceptionally well, people would notice and reward you accordingly. How wonderfully wrong I was. Tua Shayana. When I first walked into the sleek, modern offices of Northbridge Creative Agency in downtown Sterling Heights, I felt like I was stepping into my future. The agency occupied 3 floors of a converted historic bank building, with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and those trendy industrial light fixtures that screamed creative innovation. Everything about the place buzzed with energy and possibility. Northbridge Creative was the kind of marketing agency that every recent graduate dreamed of joining. They worked with major brands, won industry awards, and their client roster read like a who's who of successful businesses in the tri-state area. Getting hired there felt like winning the lottery, especially for someone like me who had spent months sending out applications and getting nothing but polite rejection letters. Quillan Thorne was the creative director and partial owner, a man in his early 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident swagger that came from years of success. During my interview, he wore an expensive charcoal suit and spoke in that practiced way that successful executives master every word chosen for maximum impact. When he offered me the position of digital marketing specialist, I practically floated out of the building. "We're looking for someone who can help us modernize our digital presence," he had told me, leaning back in his leather chair. "Social media, content strategy, online engagement. That whole world that, frankly, most of us old-school advertising folks are still figuring out." What I didn't realize at the time was that by "help us modernize," he meant build everything from scratch while we take the credit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My first day at Northbridge Creative, I wore my best professional outfit, a navy blazer my mother had bought me as a graduation gift, paired with heels that I hoped made me look more confident than I felt. I remember walking through those glass doors at exactly 8:30 a.m., a full half hour before my scheduled start time, because I wanted to make the right impression. The truth is, I was desperately in love with digital marketing. There was something magical about crafting the perfect social media campaign, about understanding exactly what would make people stop scrolling and actually engage with content. I could spend hours analyzing metrics, tweaking ad copy, and developing content strategies that would turn casual browsers into devoted customers. In college, I had managed social media for 3 different local businesses as part of my internship requirements, and I'd seen firsthand how the right digital strategy could transform a struggling company. There was this small boutique clothing store that was barely surviving until I helped them develop an Instagram presence that showcased their unique pieces. Within 6 months, their online sales had tripled, and they were opening a second location. That's what I brought to Northbridge Creative. Not just theoretical knowledge from textbooks, but real experience and genuine passion for the work. I saw digital marketing not just as advertising, but as storytelling, as building genuine connections between brands and people. What I found when I started at Northbridge was that their digital presence was basically non-existent. They had a Facebook page that hadn't been updated in 8 months, a Twitter account with 47 followers, and a website that looked like it had been designed in 2008. For a creative agency representing major brands, their own online presence was embarrassingly outdated. But I saw opportunity where others saw problems. This was my chance to build something from the ground up, to prove what I could do when given the resources and freedom to implement my ideas. My first week, I spent every spare moment auditing their existing online presence, researching their competitors, and developing a comprehensive digital strategy that would not only catch them up to industry standards, but actually put them ahead of the competition. I created detailed reports, mock-ups of potential social media campaigns, and a timeline for implementing everything from Instagram content calendars to LinkedIn thought leadership articles. When I presented my initial findings to Quillan and the rest of the creative team, I felt electric with excitement. This was my moment to show them what I could bring to the table, to prove that hiring me had been the right decision. Quillan listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals, and when I finished my presentation, he said, "Interesting ideas, Ivory. Let's see what you can do with them." I walked out of that meeting room, feeling like I was about to change everything. I had no idea that I was walking into 3 years of having my ideas stolen, my contributions minimized, and my value systematically undermined. But I also had no idea that this experience would forge me into someone strong enough to build something that would ultimately destroy the very system that tried to break me. Because here's what Quillan Thorne never understood. When you consistently underestimate someone who's quietly building something extraordinary, you're not just making a mistake, you're creating your own destruction. And I was about to become very, very good at being underestimated. To understand how devastating Quillan's words would eventually become, you need to know who I really was beneath that polished professional exterior. Because the truth is, I wasn't just another ambitious graduate looking for a career boost. I was someone who had found her calling and was willing to sacrifice everything to master it. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, I was always the one organizing things behind the scenes. While my friends were the ones giving presentations or running for student council, I was the person who created their campaign strategies, designed their posters, and figured out how to get their message to resonate with different groups of students. My high school guidance counselor once told my parents, "Ivory has this rare ability to understand what people want before they even know it themselves." My family wasn't wealthy, but they were supportive in their own practical way. My father worked as a mechanic at Thompson's Auto Service, and my mother managed the front desk at our local dentist's office. They were hardworking people who believed that education was the key to building a better life, even if they didn't quite understand what digital marketing actually meant. "So you help companies sell things on the computer?" my mother would ask, genuinely trying to grasp what I was studying. "Sort of, Mom," I'd explain patiently. "It's more about helping businesses connect with the right people at the right time, telling stories that make people care about what they're offering." She'd nod politely, but I could tell she was still confused. To her generation, marketing meant newspaper ads and radio commercials. The idea that you could build entire businesses through something as intangible as social media engagement seemed almost like magic. But to me, it made perfect sense. I had grown up watching the internet transform from this novelty that only computer nerds used to this powerful force that shaped how people thought, felt, and made decisions. I remembered being 13 and watching my friend's older sister become genuinely famous on YouTube just by being authentically herself, building a community of thousands of people who trusted her recommendations about everything from makeup to life advice. That's when I realized that marketing wasn't really about selling products. It was about building relationships, creating trust, and understanding human psychology on a massive scale. The companies that succeeded online weren't necessarily the ones with the biggest budgets, but the ones that could make genuine connections with their audiences. In college, I threw myself into every aspect of digital communications. While my classmates were focused on getting good grades and networking at career fairs, I was spending my evenings running social media campaigns for local businesses, analyzing what worked and what didn't, constantly experimenting with new approaches. I had this obsessive attention to detail that my professors sometimes found excessive. For a single Instagram campaign, I would create detailed spreadsheets tracking engagement rates by time of day, hashtag performance, and audience demographics. I'd A/B test different captions, analyze which visual styles generated the most comments, and study the posting patterns of successful competitors. My roommate, Lyra Harborfield, used to tease me about my marketing notebooks, these thick binders where I documented every successful campaign I encountered, breaking down exactly why it worked and how the strategies could be adapted for different industries. Ivory, you realize you're going to burn yourself out before you even graduate, right? Lyra would say, watching me work on client projects until 2 a.m. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it didn't feel like work to me. It felt like solving puzzles, like being a detective who uncovered what made people tick. Every successful campaign was proof that I was getting better at understanding human nature, at predicting what would capture attention and inspire action. The small businesses I worked with during college became my laboratory. There was Harmony Wellness, a struggling yoga studio that was about to close until I helped them develop a social media presence that showcased not just their classes but the sense of community and transformation their members experienced. Within 6 months, they had a waiting list for popular classes and had expanded into online sessions. Then there was Brewster Coffee Roasters, a local coffee shop that was losing customers to a chain that had opened nearby. I helped them tell the story of their direct trade relationships with farmers, their careful roasting process, and the personalities of their baristas. Their sales increased by 40% in 4 months, and they started getting featured in regional food blogs. Each success made me more confident that I had found my calling, but it also revealed something about my personality that would later be used against me. I was thorough, to the point of perfectionism. I preferred to work quietly behind the scenes, letting the results speak for themselves rather than drawing attention to my contributions. I was collaborative rather than competitive, always crediting team efforts even when I had done most of the work. My professors praised my mature approach and professional humility, but they also sometimes encouraged me to speak up more and promote your achievements. I didn't understand why that mattered. In my mind, good work would naturally be recognized and rewarded. Looking back, I can see how naive that belief was, but at the time, it seemed logical. Why would anyone take credit for work they didn't do? Why would talent and dedication not be enough to succeed? When I graduated summa cum laude with a portfolio of successful campaigns and glowing recommendations from every business I'd worked with, I felt ready to conquer the professional world. I had dreams of working for a prestigious agency where I could implement strategies for major brands, where my ideas could reach millions of people and create real impact. Northbridge Creative Agency seemed like the perfect place to build that future. I imagined myself growing within the company, eventually leading my own team, maybe even becoming a partner someday. I pictured Quillan Thorne as a mentor who would guide my development and help me reach my potential. I had no idea that my greatest strengths, my attention to detail, my collaborative spirit, my preference for letting work speak for itself, would be systematically weaponized against me. But more importantly, I had no idea how much stronger those qualities would make me once I learned to use them on my own terms. My first official day at Northbridge Creative Agency started at 8:15 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning in September. I had arrived early, clutching a coffee from the shop downstairs, and wearing what I hoped was the perfect balance of professional and creative. A charcoal blazer with a subtle pattern, paired with dark jeans that the sales associate had assured me were business casual appropriate. The reception area was everything I had remembered from my interview and more. Sleek white furniture contrasted beautifully with the exposed brick walls, and there was this massive digital display showing a rotating carousel of the agency's award-winning campaigns. Everything about the space whispered success and innovation. You must be Ivory. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled auburn hair and a warm smile, greeted me before I could even approach her desk. I'm Desdemona Vance, but everyone here just calls me Des. Quillan told me to watch for you. Ready for the grand tour? Des walked me through the agency's 3 floors, pointing out different departments with obvious pride. The ground floor housed reception, the main conference rooms, and what she called the war room, a space with massive whiteboards and comfortable seating where the creative team brainstormed campaign concepts. "This is where the magic happens," she explained, gesturing toward a group of people huddled around a table covered with sketches and printouts. "That's our core creative team. They've been working on the Hampton Hotel's rebrand for about 6 weeks now." The second floor was where the account managers worked, handling client relationships and project coordination. Their workspace was more traditional. Individual desks, glass-walled offices for senior staff, and multiple meeting rooms with names like Innovation Station and Breakthrough Bay. "And this," Des said as we climbed the stairs to the third floor, "is where you'll be working." The top floor was different from the others. Instead of the open, collaborative spaces I'd seen below, this floor felt more isolated. There were several individual offices along the perimeter, and in the center, a small cluster of desks that looked almost like an afterthought. "These are for our support staff," Des explained, leading me to a desk near the back corner. "Digital marketing, data analysis, administrative coordination, basically all the behind-the-scenes work that keeps everything running smoothly." Something about the way she said support staff made my stomach flutter, but I pushed the feeling aside. Every agency had hierarchy, and I was starting at the bottom. That was normal, expected even. My desk was positioned next to a large window that looked out over downtown Sterling Heights, but it was also noticeably separated from the main cluster of workstations. A nameplate reading Ivory Finch Digital Marketing Specialist sat next to a new computer setup and a small pile of orientation materials. "Quillan wanted you to get settled this morning, and then he'll meet with you after lunch to discuss your initial projects," Des told me. "In the meantime, these packets will give you background on our current clients and ongoing campaigns." As Des headed back downstairs, I settled into my new workspace and began reviewing the materials. What I discovered was both exciting and concerning. Northbridge Creative represented some impressive clients: a regional bank, several upscale restaurants, a luxury car dealership, and a growing tech startup. But their digital presence across all these accounts was shockingly underdeveloped. Their social media posts were infrequent and generic, their websites looked outdated, and from what I could see, they weren't utilizing any of the advanced targeting and analytics tools that had become standard in the industry. It was like they were running a 2010 playbook in a 2018 market. Around 10:30, a woman appeared at my desk carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was probably in her early 30s, with short blonde hair and an easy smile that immediately put me at ease. "You must be the new digital person," she said, offering me one of the cups. "I'm Cindy Shaw, account manager for most of our hospitality clients. Thought you might need caffeine for your first day." "Ivory Finch," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Thank you so much. This is exactly what I needed." Cindy perched on the edge of my desk and lowered her voice slightly. "So, digital marketing, huh? That's been a long time coming around here. We've been telling Quillan for months that our clients are asking for more sophisticated online strategies." "Really? What's been holding things back?" "Honestly?" Cindy glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "Quillan's kind of old school. He built this agency on traditional advertising principles, and he's been slow to embrace the digital side of things. I think he finally realized he didn't have a choice anymore when we started losing pitches to agencies that could offer integrated campaigns." This was interesting information, and it helped explain why my position had been created. But it also raised some questions about how receptive Quillan would be to the changes I wanted to implement. "What's he like to work for?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Cindy's expression became more guarded. "He's demanding, very focused on results, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. He's built something really successful here, and he's protective of the agency's reputation. Just make sure you're prepared when you present ideas to him. He doesn't respond well to being challenged, especially by—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Well, especially by people he doesn't know yet." Before I could ask what she meant by that, a voice boomed across the floor. "Shaw, conference room now. We need to prep for the Riverside Industries call." Quillan Thorne stood in the doorway of what I assumed was his office. looking exactly as commanding and self-assured as he had during my interview. Today he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his expression suggested he wasn't used to waiting for people to respond to his requests. "Coming," Cindy called back, then turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls. But hey, welcome to the team. If you need anything, my desk is right downstairs." As she hurried away, I watched Quillan retreat into his office and close the door. Through the glass walls, I could see him pacing as he talked on his phone, gesturing emphatically at whatever crisis required his immediate attention. I spent the rest of the morning familiarizing myself with their current campaigns, and what I found made me increasingly excited about the potential for improvement. These weren't bad clients or unsuccessful businesses. They just needed someone who understood how to translate their strengths into the digital landscape. By the time 1 p.m. arrived and Des called to let me know Quillan was ready to meet, I had filled a notepad with ideas and was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. I had no idea that I was about to walk into the first of many conversations where my expertise would be questioned, my suggestions would be dismissed, and my value would be systematically undermined. I was still operating under the naive assumption that good ideas and hard work would speak for themselves. I was about to learn that in Quillan Thorne's world, only one voice really mattered, and it certainly wasn't mine. That first meeting with Quillan in his corner office went better than I had dared to hope. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing my resume one more time while I perched on the edge of one of his leather chairs, trying to project confidence despite the butterflies doing gymnastics in my stomach. "So, Ivory," he began, setting my file aside and leaning back in his chair, "I've been looking at our digital analytics, and frankly, they're embarrassing for an agency of our caliber. Our clients are starting to ask questions we can't answer, and I need someone who can get us caught up to where we should have been 2 years ago." This was music to my ears. Finally, someone who recognized the problem and was ready to invest in solutions. "I completely understand," I replied, pulling out the notebook where I'd been jotting down observations. "From what I've seen of your current digital presence, there's incredible potential for improvement across all your client accounts. The foundations are solid, but the digital strategy needs to be completely reimagined. Show me what you mean." For the next 30 minutes, I walked him through my preliminary analysis. I showed him how their competitors were engaging audiences on social media, how their clients' websites were underperforming in search rankings, and most importantly, how much potential revenue they were leaving on the table by not leveraging digital marketing properly. "Take Hampton Hotels, for example," I said, pulling up their Instagram account on my phone. "They have beautiful properties, but their social media makes them look generic. They're posting stock photos instead of showcasing what makes each location unique. Their engagement rate is less than 1%, which means their content isn't connecting with their audience at all." Quillan leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What would you do differently?" "I'd focus on storytelling. Instead of just posting pretty pictures of hotel rooms, we'd share the experiences guests have. The couple celebrating their anniversary in the rooftop restaurant, the business traveler who found exactly what they needed in the lobby cafe, the family whose vacation was made perfect by the concierge's local recommendations. People don't just book hotels, they book memories." Something shifted in Quillan's expression. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely impressed. "That's actually very insightful. How quickly could you implement something like that?" "Give me 2 weeks to develop a comprehensive strategy, and I could have the first phase launched within a month." "Do it," he said without hesitation. "Hampton Hotels has been asking about social media engagement for months. If you can deliver results there, we'll expand the approach to other clients." I practically floated out of his office. This was exactly the opportunity I had been hoping for. A chance to prove what I could do with a real budget and actual support from leadership. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of creative energy and hard work. I threw myself into developing the Hampton Hotels campaign with an intensity that surprised even me. I researched each of their 7 locations, studied their customer demographics, and created detailed content calendars that would transform their social media presence, from generic corporate posting to authentic storytelling. I collaborated with their in-house photographer to capture the kinds of moments I had envisioned: real guests enjoying real experiences, staff members who genuinely cared about their work, and the unique character of each property. Instead of sterile room photos, we showcased the sunrise view from the presidential suite, the locally sourced ingredients in their restaurant, and the historical details that made their downtown location special. What happened next exceeded my wildest expectations. Within 2 weeks of launching the new strategy, Hampton Hotel's social media engagement increased by 340%. Their booking inquiries through social media channels tripled. Most importantly, their customer sentiment scores improved dramatically as people began engaging with their brand in meaningful ways. Ivory, this is remarkable work, Cindy Shaw told me one afternoon, stopping by my desk with a huge smile. I just got off the phone with Hampton's marketing director, and she's over the moon about the response they're getting. She specifically asked me to tell you that this is exactly what they were hoping for when they signed with us. But the real validation came when Quillan called me into his office the following Monday morning. Instead of his usual stern demeanor, he was actually smiling. "I don't know what kind of magic you worked with Hampton Hotels," he said, "but their CEO just called to personally thank me for the campaign. Apparently, they've had more positive customer feedback in the last 3 weeks than in the previous 6 months combined." "I'm so glad it's working," I replied, trying to contain my excitement. The key was really understanding what makes their brand unique and finding ways to showcase that authentically. "Well, whatever you did, I want you to do it for Westfield Financial. They've been struggling with their online presence, and after seeing these Hampton results, I think your approach could be exactly what they need." Westfield Financial was one of the agency's biggest clients, a regional bank with 12 branches and a reputation for conservative, traditional marketing. Getting to work on their account felt like a huge promotion, and I dove into the project with the same enthusiasm I'd brought to Hampton Hotels. During this period, I also began building genuine relationships with my colleagues. Cindy and I started having lunch together regularly, and she introduced me to other account managers who were eager to learn about digital marketing strategies for their clients. Des would stop by my desk with coffee and updates about office gossip, making me feel like part of the team. Even some of the creative staff downstairs began seeking my input on campaigns. Perrin Vance, one of their senior graphic designers, started consulting with me about how visual elements would perform on different social media platforms. "You have this gift for understanding how people actually use these platforms," he told me one evening when we were both working late. "Most people just think about social media as another place to put ads, but you really get how it's different." For the first time since graduation, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The work was challenging and rewarding, my colleagues respected my expertise, and Quillan seemed genuinely pleased with my contributions. I started imagining myself growing within the agency, maybe eventually running the entire digital department. I remember one particular Friday evening, working alone on the 3rd floor as the sun set over Sterling Heights, feeling an overwhelming sense of contentment. I had found my place in the professional world, and everything seemed to be falling into perfect alignment. What I didn't realize was that my success was about to become my biggest problem, and that the very achievements I was so proud of would soon be used against me in ways I never could have imagined. The first crack in my perfect professional world appeared on a Thursday morning in November, during what should have been a celebration of our success. I was settling into my morning routine, coffee, email review, and checking the analytics from our active campaigns, when Des called up to tell me there was an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. These company-wide meetings were rare, usually reserved for major announcements or quarterly reviews. I made my way downstairs to find the entire agency gathered around the large oval table, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate everyone. Quillan stood at the head of the room, looking particularly pleased with himself, while an easel beside him displayed an enlarged printout of Hampton Hotel's latest social media metrics. "I wanted to bring everyone together this morning to share some fantastic news," Quillan began, his voice carrying that confident tone I'd grown accustomed to. "As you can see from these numbers, our innovative approach to Hampton Hotel's digital presence has exceeded all expectations." My heart swelled with pride as he continued describing the campaign's success. The engagement increases, the booking inquiries, the positive customer feedback. This was it, my moment of recognition in front of the entire team. "The key breakthrough," Quillan continued, was recognizing that hospitality marketing needed to focus on emotional storytelling rather than traditional promotional content. By shifting our strategy to showcase authentic guest experiences, we've created a template that we can apply across multiple client accounts. He gestured to the metrics with obvious satisfaction. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking creativity that sets Northbridge Creative apart from our competitors. It's why companies like Hampton Hotels trust us to elevate their brand. I waited for him to mention my name, to acknowledge the weeks of research and strategy development that had made the campaign possible. But as he moved on to discussing how this success would help them win new clients, I realized with growing confusion that no specific recognition was coming. "Quillan," I said, raising my hand tentatively, "should I walk everyone through the strategic thinking behind the content calendar and targeting approach?" He paused, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption. "That won't be necessary, Ivory. I think everyone understands the concept." My cheeks burned with embarrassment as 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Cindy Shaw gave me a sympathetic smile, but others seemed confused about why I had spoken up at all. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room as people filed out, hoping to speak with Quillan privately. When the room had mostly cleared, I approached him as he gathered his materials. "Quillan, I was wondering if we could discuss how to best position my role in future client presentations. Since I developed the Hampton strategy, I thought it might be valuable for me to present the technical aspects directly to prospective clients." His expression grew cold. "Ivory, I think you're misunderstanding how client relationships work. I appreciate your contributions to the tactical execution, but strategy decisions happen at a much higher level. Clients want to work with senior leadership, not individual specialists." "I understand that," I replied carefully, "but since I created the specific methodologies we're using, I thought—" "You implemented approaches that we collectively decided upon," he interrupted. "This agency succeeds because we function as a team, not because any single person tries to take individual credit." The injustice of his words hit me like a physical blow. I had literally spent 3 weeks developing every aspect of that campaign from scratch, but somehow pointing that out made me the one who was inappropriately claiming credit. Over the following weeks, I began noticing patterns that I had previously overlooked or rationalized away. When Perrin Vance designed a particularly striking visual campaign for Westfield Financial, Quillan made sure to praise his creativity in the next client meeting, and specifically mentioned his contribution in the follow-up email to the client. When Cindy Shaw successfully handled a crisis situation with a difficult restaurant client, she was invited to present her conflict resolution approach at the monthly senior staff meeting. But when my social media strategy for a local tech startup resulted in a 50% increase in qualified leads and a feature article in Sterling Heights Business Journal, the success was attributed to, quote, "the agency's innovative digital approach in all external communications." I started paying closer attention to how Quillan interacted with different team members, and the differences were impossible to ignore. With Perrin, he was collaborative and respectful, often asking for his input on visual concepts and acknowledging his expertise publicly. With Cindy, he treated her as a trusted partner, frequently consulting her opinion on client relationship strategies. But with me, his demeanor was consistently different. He listened to my reports with what seemed like forced patience, interrupted my explanations more frequently, and had a way of rephrasing my ideas that somehow made them sound like his own insights. "Maybe I'm being too sensitive," I confided to Lyra during one of our weekly phone calls. "Everyone says he's demanding, and maybe this is just how he treats people until they prove themselves." "How much more can you prove yourself?" Lyra asked pointedly. "You've delivered results on every single project. If that's not enough proof, what is?" But I wasn't ready to accept that explanation yet. I convinced myself that I just needed to be more assertive, more visible in my contributions. Surely, if I spoke up more in meetings and made my role more obvious, the recognition would follow. The breaking point came during a new business pitch for Aurora Manufacturing, a mid-sized company looking to modernize their entire marketing approach. Quillan assigned me to develop the digital strategy portion of the presentation, which I threw myself into with characteristic thoroughness. I researched their industry, analyzed their competitors' digital presence, and created a comprehensive strategy that would position them as thought leaders in sustainable manufacturing. The presentation I developed was sophisticated, data-driven, and included specific tactical recommendations that would set them apart from their competition. The morning of the pitch, Quillan called me into his office. "I've been reviewing your materials for the Aurora presentation," he said, "and while the content is solid, I think it would be better if I delivered this portion myself. Clients prefer to hear strategic recommendations from senior-level staff." "But I know the strategy inside and out," I protested. "I've anticipated their likely questions and prepared detailed explanations for each recommendation." "I'm sure you have," he replied dismissively, "but presentation is about more than just knowing the content. It's about commanding respect and projecting authority. That comes with experience." As I watched him walk into that conference room with my presentation materials, delivering my strategic recommendations as if they were his own ideas, something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't about experience or hierarchy or team collaboration. This was about systematic erasure, and I was finally ready to admit it to myself. Once I recognized the pattern of systematic erasure, I couldn't unsee it. What had been isolated incidents suddenly revealed themselves as part of a deliberate strategy to minimize my contributions, while maximizing Quillan's perceived genius. The Westfield financial campaign became the next battleground. I had spent weeks developing a comprehensive digital strategy that would modernize their conservative image while maintaining the trust and stability their customers valued. The approach I created was sophisticated, using LinkedIn thought leadership content to position their executives as financial experts, implementing targeted Facebook campaigns that spoke to different life stages, and creating an Instagram presence that humanized banking through customer success stories. The results were even better than Hampton Hotels. Within 6 weeks, Westfield's online engagement increased by 280%. Their loan inquiry forms saw a 150% boost, and most remarkably, they attracted their highest number of new young professional accounts in over 5 years. The regional banking magazine featured them in a cover story about traditional banks embracing digital innovation. I remember the exact moment I saw that magazine article. Cindy Shaw found me at my desk holding a copy with obvious excitement. "Ivory, you have to see this," she said, spreading the magazine open. "Look what they wrote about the Westfield campaign." The article was everything I had dreamed of: detailed analysis of the strategy, praise for the innovative approach, and quotes from satisfied customers who had discovered the bank through social media. But as I read through the piece, my heart sank. Every single quote was attributed to, Quillan Thorne, Creative Director of Northbridge Creative Agency. The key insight, the article quoted Quillan as saying, was recognizing that financial institutions need to balance innovation with reliability. By creating content that showcased both cutting-edge digital engagement and traditional banking values, we developed a template that other institutions are now trying to replicate. My strategy, my insight, my 3 months of research and development, all attributed to him as if I had never existed. "This is incredible exposure for the agency," Cindy said, not noticing my expression. "Quillan must be thrilled." I excused myself and walked to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the mirror and tried to process what was happening. This wasn't oversight or miscommunication anymore. This was deliberate theft, and it was escalating. That afternoon, I requested a meeting with Quillan to discuss the magazine article. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would diplomatically address the attribution issue, while suggesting ways to ensure proper credit in future press coverage. "I saw the Banking Today article about Westfield," I began carefully. "It's fantastic exposure for the agency. I was wondering if we could discuss how to better highlight the collaborative nature of our campaigns in future media opportunities." Quillan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ivory?" "Well, since I developed the specific digital strategies that the article focuses on, I thought it might be valuable to have my expertise mentioned when journalists ask about technical implementation details." His laugh was cold and dismissive. "Ivory, I think you're misunderstanding how media relations work. Journalists want to speak with decision-makers, not technicians. Your role is important, but it's behind-the-scenes support. The strategic vision comes from leadership level. But the strategies they're praising, The LinkedIn thought leadership approach, the demographic targeting, the content calendar methodology. Those were all concepts I developed and presented to you, which we then refined, approved, and implemented as agency initiatives, he replied sharply. You seem to be forgetting that no individual owns ideas in a collaborative environment. Everything you develop here becomes agency intellectual property. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not only was he stealing credit, but he was making me feel guilty for expecting recognition for my own work. The pattern continued with our next major client, Meridian Tech Solutions. I created an entire rebranding campaign that positioned them as innovators in sustainable technology. The campaign included a complete social media overhaul, a content marketing strategy featuring employee spotlights, and a series of educational videos that explained complex tech concepts in accessible language. The campaign won a regional marketing award. At the ceremony, I watched from the audience as Quillan accepted the trophy, giving a speech about pushing creative boundaries and innovative thinking that challenges industry norms. He thanked the team generically but never mentioned my name, despite the fact that every element he was being praised for came directly from my strategic plan. What made it worse was seeing how he treated other team members during this same period. When Miles Taylor, our new junior account coordinator, successfully managed a small restaurant client's grand opening event, Quillan made sure to mention his contribution in the next all-hands meeting. When Hyacinth Sterling, our freelance copywriter, created a particularly clever tagline for a local law firm, Quillan forwarded the client's enthusiastic email to the entire team with a note praising her creativity. But when I delivered results that exceeded every expectation, that won awards and generated significant new business for the agency, my contributions disappeared into the void of team effort and agency innovation. I started documenting everything. I kept copies of my strategic proposals, saved emails where I presented ideas, and maintained detailed records of my campaign development process. Part of me hoped this would provide evidence if I ever needed to defend my contributions. Mostly, though, I was trying to maintain my sanity by proving to myself that I wasn't imagining the systematic erasure of my work. The psychological impact was devastating. I found myself second-guessing every idea, wondering if my strategies were actually valuable or if I was deluding myself about my capabilities. Some mornings, I would sit in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes before work, gathering the courage to face another day of being invisible. Lyra became increasingly concerned during our phone calls. "Ivory, this is affecting your mental health," she said one evening when I was describing the latest incident. "You're starting to doubt yourself, and that's exactly what gaslighting is designed to do." "Maybe I am being too sensitive," I replied, echoing the words I'd heard from Quillan so many times. "Maybe this is just how the industry works." "No," Lyra said firmly. "This is not normal, and it's not okay. You're being systematically undermined, and it's not a reflection of your worth or your abilities. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things entirely." With each stolen achievement, each moment of being made invisible, I felt smaller and more powerless. What I didn't realize was that Quillan was about to make one final devastating move that would push me past my breaking point and force me to choose between accepting this treatment forever or finally fighting back with everything I had. The final straw came in February, during what should have been the pinnacle of my career at Northbridge Creative Agency. The Sterling Heights Chamber of Commerce had announced their search for an agency to handle the city's largest economic development campaign in decades, a massive initiative to rebrand the downtown district and attract new businesses to the area. This wasn't just another client pitch. This was the kind of prestige project that could define an agency's reputation for years to come. The budget was substantial, the timeline was ambitious, and most importantly, the entire campaign would be heavily focused on digital marketing and social media engagement, exactly my area of expertise. When Quillan announced during our Monday morning meeting that Northbridge had been invited to submit a proposal, I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. This was my moment to shine, to prove definitively that my strategies could work on a massive scale. "This is going to require all hands on deck," Quillan said, scanning the room. "The proposal is due in 3 weeks, And the competition is going to be fierce. We're up against agencies from the capital city, some with twice our resources. He began assigning different aspects of the proposal to various team members. Perrin Vance would handle the visual branding concepts. Cindy Shaw would develop the client relationship strategy. The creative team would work on traditional advertising elements. And Ivory, he said, finally turning to me, I want you to develop the digital strategy component. This is going to be heavily focused on social media engagement, online community building, and digital marketing tactics. Make it comprehensive. I want this to be the strongest part of our proposal. I threw myself into the project with an intensity that surprised even me. I spent the next 2 weeks developing what I knew was the most sophisticated digital marketing strategy I had ever created. I researched successful downtown revitalization campaigns from across the country, analyzed demographic data for Sterling Heights, and created detailed buyer personas for different types of businesses we wanted to attract. The strategy I developed was multi-layered and innovative. I proposed creating an digital downtown ambassador program where local business owners would share their stories through coordinated social media campaigns. I designed a comprehensive content marketing approach that would showcase the district's unique character while highlighting available commercial opportunities. Most importantly, I developed a data-driven methodology for tracking engagement and measuring the economic impact of our digital efforts. I created interactive mock-ups showing how the campaigns would look across different platforms, developed detailed timelines for implementation, and even included budget projections that demonstrated how digital marketing could deliver measurable return on investment. The presentation materials I produced were professional, comprehensive, and innovative. But the piece I was most proud of was my research into emerging social media trends and how they could be leveraged for economic development. I had discovered several cutting-edge approaches that no other agency in our region was using: techniques for virtual reality storefront tours, augmented reality marketing for retail spaces, and sophisticated retargeting strategies for commercial real estate. The night before the presentation, I stayed at the office until nearly midnight, perfecting every detail of my portion of the proposal. I printed presentation boards, organized supporting materials, and rehearsed my talking points until I could deliver them flawlessly. I felt more prepared and confident than I had since starting at Northbridge. The morning of the presentation, I arrived early and set up my materials in the conference room. The Chamber of Commerce had sent a committee of 7 people, including the mayor, several prominent business leaders, and the economic development director. This was exactly the kind of high-profile audience where I could demonstrate my expertise and finally receive the recognition I deserved. 20 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin, Quillan called me into his office. "Ivory, I've been thinking about today's presentation," he said, his tone casual but his expression serious. "I've decided that I'm going to handle the digital strategy portion myself." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I think it would be more effective if all the strategic components came from senior leadership," he explained. "The Chamber Committee will be more receptive to hearing digital strategy from someone at my level rather than from a specialist." "But Quillan, I know this strategy inside and out," I protested, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've spent 2 weeks developing every aspect of it. I can answer any questions they might have about implementation, metrics, or technical details." "I'm sure you can," he replied dismissively. "But presentation is about more than just knowing the content. It's about commanding respect and projecting authority. These are serious business leaders who need to feel confident in our agency's leadership." "I understand the importance of the presentation," I said, feeling desperation creeping into my voice. "But this is my area of expertise. I created these strategies, I understand the nuances, and I've prepared for every possible question they might ask." "Ivory, you're not understanding me," Quillan said, his tone growing colder. "This decision has been made. I'll be presenting the digital strategy, and I need you to brief me on the key points so I can deliver them effectively." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to give you a briefing on my own presentation so you can present my work as your own?" "I want you to help ensure this presentation is successful," he replied. "That's what being a team player means." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The audacity of what he was asking, demanding that I coach him on how to present my own innovative strategies while he took full credit, was so outrageous that I almost couldn't process it. "This isn't about being a team player," I said finally, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "This is about taking credit for work I created. Every single idea in that digital strategy came from my research, my analysis, my creative thinking. You didn't contribute to its development at all." Quillan's expression hardened. "That's where you're wrong, Ivory. Strategic vision comes from leadership level. You may have handled the tactical research, but the overall direction and approval came from me. And frankly, your attitude right now is exactly why you're not ready to present to clients of this caliber." "My attitude?" I repeated, incredulous. "What attitude? Expecting recognition for my own work?" "Your inability to understand hierarchy and teamwork," he said sharply. "Your constant need to claim individual credit instead of supporting agency success. This is exactly the kind of ego-driven behavior that damages client relationships." I felt something break inside me at that moment. Not just my professional composure, but something deeper. My willingness to accept this treatment, to rationalize it away, to convince myself that I was the problem. "I'm not going to brief you on my presentation," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not going to brief you on my presentation. If you want to present my digital strategy, you'll have to figure it out yourself." Quillan's face flushed with anger. "Ivory, if you're not willing to support this presentation, then maybe you're not the right fit for this agency." "Maybe I'm not," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I walked out of his office, past the conference room where my meticulously prepared materials still sat waiting, past Des at the reception desk who looked at me with concern, and straight to my desk on the 3rd floor. As I sat there, staring out the window at downtown Sterling Heights, the very area I had spent weeks developing strategies to revitalize, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer willing to be erased, minimized, or gaslit. I was no longer willing to watch my work be stolen and my contributions be dismissed. But I also knew that this confrontation had pushed things past the point of no return. Quillan wasn't going to forget this moment, and he certainly wasn't going to forgive it. I spent the rest of that morning wondering if I had just destroyed my career, or finally found the courage to reclaim it. The Chamber of Commerce presentation happened without me. I spent that Tuesday morning at my desk, mechanically responding to emails and trying to focus on routine tasks while knowing that Quillan was downstairs in the conference room, presenting my innovative digital strategies as his own visionary ideas. Around noon, I heard celebratory voices drifting up from the 2nd floor. The presentation had obviously gone well. Part of me felt a bitter satisfaction knowing that my strategies had succeeded, but it was overshadowed by the hollow ache of watching someone else receive credit for my most creative work. For the rest of that week, Quillan avoided me entirely. When we passed in the hallway, he looked through me as if I were invisible. During the few meetings where we were both present, he addressed other team members but never spoke to me directly. The message was clear. I had crossed a line and there would be consequences. On Friday afternoon, Des called my extension with a message that made my stomach drop. "Ivory, Quillan wants to see you in his office at 4:45. 4:45 p.m. 15 minutes before the end of the business day, when most people would be wrapping up their work and heading home for the weekend." The timing felt ominous and deliberate. I spent those final few hours of the day trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. Maybe this would be a disciplinary meeting where he would make it clear that future insubordination wouldn't be tolerated. Maybe he would demand an apology for my refusal to brief him on the presentation. I rehearsed different responses, different ways to maintain my dignity, while potentially salvaging my position. When 4:45 arrived, I walked down to the 2nd floor with as much composure as I could muster. Quillan's office door was open, and he was sitting behind his mahogany desk with a single piece of paper positioned in front of him. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through his windows cast long shadows across the room, giving everything an almost theatrical quality. "Close the door and have a seat," he said without looking up. I settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was something in his tone, not anger, exactly, but a cold finality that was somehow worse than rage. "Ivory," he began, finally meeting my eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Tuesday's presentation, and I've come to some difficult conclusions about your fit within this organization." The words hit me like ice water. This wasn't a disciplinary meeting. This was something much worse. The incident with the chamber presentation revealed some fundamental issues that I can no longer ignore, he continued, his voice maintaining that same detached, clinical tone. Your inability to support team initiatives, your insistence on claiming individual credit, and most concerning, your unwillingness to respect established hierarchy. Quillan, if this is about Tuesday, I started, but he held up a hand to silence me. This isn't about one incident, Ivory. This is about a pattern of behavior that's incompatible with how successful agencies operate. You seem to believe that tactical execution entitles you to strategic recognition, and that's simply not how professional environments function. I stared at him in disbelief. He was describing my expertise and my refusal to be exploited as character flaws, as if expecting credit for my own innovative work was somehow unprofessional. The truth is, he continued, leaning back in his chair with an expression of practiced regret, and I'm going to be completely honest with you here, anyone could do your job. Social media posting, content calendar management, basic digital analytics. These are operational tasks, not strategic thinking. We need someone in this role who understands that and can execute efficiently, without needing constant validation. The words hung in the air like a slap. Anyone could do your job. After everything I had accomplished, after the Hampton Hotel's success, the Westfield financial breakthrough, the award-winning Meridian Tech campaign, after developing strategies that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in new business for the agency, he was reducing my contributions to social media posting. You're firing me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm making a change that's in the best interest of the agency, he replied with that same infuriating calm. Your last day will be today. Des has prepared your final paperwork, and I'll need you to return your keycard and any agency materials before you leave. But my campaigns, I began, thinking about all the ongoing projects, the strategies I had developed that were still in implementation phases. Will be handled by the team, he interrupted. Like I said, these are operational functions. Anyone with basic digital marketing knowledge can maintain what you've set up. The casual dismissal of everything I had built was almost more devastating than the termination itself. 3 years of innovation, relationship building with clients, and strategic development reduced to, quote, operational functions that anyone could handle. This is because I wouldn't let you steal credit for the chamber presentation, I said, anger finally breaking through my shock. Quillan's expression hardened. This is because you don't understand what it means to be part of a team. You consistently prioritize your ego over agency success, and that's not sustainable in a leadership environment. Leadership environment? I repeated incredulously. I was never given the opportunity for leadership. Every time I demonstrated strategic thinking, you took credit for it. Every innovation I developed became an, quote, agency initiative, with no acknowledgement of my contribution. That's exactly the attitude I'm talking about, he said, shaking his head with manufactured disappointment. Your inability to see beyond your individual contributions to the bigger picture. It's unfortunate, but it's why this change is necessary. I sat there for a moment, processing the complete inversion of reality he was presenting. In his version of events, I was the problem employee whose ego prevented me from being a team player. My expertise was irrelevant, my contributions were easily replaceable, and my desire for recognition was a character flaw. There's nothing personal about this decision, he added, as if that somehow made it better. You're simply not the right fit for where this agency is heading. Nothing personal, as if systematically stealing credit for my work, gaslighting me about my contributions, and now destroying my career, was just a neutral business decision. I'll need you to pack your personal items and be out of the building within the hour, he said, glancing at his watch. Des will escort you to collect your things. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. I don't think so, he replied, already turning his attention back to other papers on his desk. Good luck with your future endeavors, Ivory. The dismissal was complete. I walked out of his office in a daze, past the second-floor workspace, where my former colleagues were wrapping up their Friday afternoon tasks. A few people looked up as I passed, but no one met my eyes. Word had clearly already spread. Des was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs with a small cardboard box and an expression of genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, Ivory, she whispered as we walked toward the elevator. This doesn't seem right. The third floor felt surreal as I packed my few personal belongings. A small plant, some photos, a coffee mug my mother had given me. 3 years of my professional life reduced to items that fit in a single box. As we rode the elevator down, Des spoke quietly. For what it's worth, everyone knows how much you contributed here. Quillan can say whatever he wants, but we all know the truth. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Outside, the late afternoon sun was setting over Sterling Heights, casting the same golden light that had once filled me with optimism about my future at Northbridge Creative. I walked to my car carrying that small box, feeling smaller and more humiliated than I had ever felt in my life. But beneath the devastation, something else was beginning to stir. A quiet, burning determination that Quillan Thorne had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. He was about to learn exactly how irreplaceable I really was. The first week after my termination passed in a blur of numbness and disbelief. I spent most of my time in my small apartment, moving mechanically between my couch, my kitchen, and my bed, as if I were sleepwalking through someone else's life. My apartment, which had once felt like a cozy refuge after long days at the agency, now felt cramped and suffocating. Every surface seemed to mock me with reminders of my former professional life. Industry magazines I'd subscribed to, marketing books I'd studied, even the laptop where I'd developed campaigns that had won awards for someone else. The silence was the worst part. For 3 years, my days had been filled with meetings, phone calls, creative brainstorming, and the constant hum of agency life. Now the only sounds were the ticking of my kitchen clock and the occasional car passing by my window. The silence left too much space for my thoughts to spiral into dark places. By Wednesday, I forced myself to start applying for jobs, but the process felt futile and humiliating. Every position I found seemed to require references from previous supervisors, and I couldn't bring myself to list Quillan's name. How could I explain why my most recent boss, who had benefited from 3 years of my innovative work, would likely give me a lukewarm recommendation at best? I crafted carefully worded emails to other contacts in the industry, reaching out to vendors I'd worked with, clients who had praised my campaigns, and colleagues from other agencies I'd met at networking events. But Sterling Heights wasn't a huge market, and word travels fast in the marketing world. I had no way of knowing what version of my departure Quillan was sharing with his professional network. The financial reality began hitting me by the end of the first week. My savings account, which had seemed reasonably healthy when I had a steady paycheck, suddenly looked precarious when viewed as my only source of income. I calculated and recalculated my expenses, trying to figure out how long I could survive without work. Rent, car payment, student loans, groceries, utilities. The numbers were sobering. My parents called every few days, their voices carefully cheerful, as they tried to offer support, without fully understanding what had happened. I hadn't told them the complete truth about why I'd been fired, just that there had been personality conflicts and different visions for the department. "Honey, maybe this is a blessing in disguise," my mother said during one of our conversations. "Maybe you were meant for something bigger than that place." I appreciated her optimism, but it felt hollow when I was staring at job rejection emails and wondering if Quillan was right. Maybe anyone really could do what I had been doing. Maybe I had overestimated my own value and contributions. Lyra was more direct in her support, calling me almost daily with a mixture of encouragement and righteous anger. "Ivory, you cannot let that man destroy your confidence," she said during one particularly low moment when I'd confessed that I was starting to doubt my own abilities. "I watched you work through college. I saw what you accomplished with those local businesses. Your skills didn't disappear because some insecure boss felt threatened by your talent. But self-doubt is insidious. When you're alone with your thoughts for hours every day, when rejection emails pile up in your inbox, when you're watching your savings account slowly drain, it becomes easy to believe that maybe you really weren't as valuable as you thought." I started second-guessing every campaign I'd ever created, every strategy I'd developed, every success I'd thought I'd achieved. Had the Hampton Hotels campaign really been that innovative? Or had I just gotten lucky? Was the Westfield financial success more about market timing than strategic brilliance? Maybe Quillan had been right to minimize my contributions. The worst moments came late at night, when I would lie awake replaying conversations and interactions from my time at Northbridge, wondering if I could have handled things differently. If I had been more assertive from the beginning, would Quillan have respected me more? If I had been better at office politics, could I have prevented the systematic erosion of my contributions? But then, about 2 weeks after my termination, Cindy Shaw called me. "Ivory, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she said, her voice careful and quiet. "I wanted to check on you, but also, I thought you should know what's been happening here since you left." My heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "They're struggling," she said simply. "Quillan hired someone to replace you. Linda Croft. She has about 5 years of experience with a smaller agency downtown. She started Monday, and by Wednesday, she was asking questions that made it obvious she doesn't understand the systems you built." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, but also genuine concern for the clients whose campaigns might suffer. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Basic stuff that you handled seamlessly. How the content approval process works with Hampton Hotels. Why certain posting schedules were set up the way they were. Where you kept the analytics reports for Westfield Financial. Things that seemed automatic when you were here but apparently weren't as simple as everyone assumed." Cindy paused, then continued more quietly. "The Hampton Hotel's marketing director called yesterday asking about some inconsistencies in their social media content. Apparently the tone and timing of recent posts felt off-brand compared to what they were used to. A small flame of satisfaction sparked in my chest, though I tried to suppress it. I didn't want Hampton Hotels to suffer, but I couldn't deny feeling validated that the sophisticated strategy I'd developed wasn't as easily replicable as Quillan had claimed. "And there's something else," Cindy added. "Linda gave her notice yesterday, 2 weeks in, and she's already quitting. She told Des that the workload was, quote, unreasonable, and that she felt like she was being set up to fail." I sat in stunned silence for a moment. Someone with 5 years of experience had quit after 2 weeks of doing what Quillan claimed anyone could do. "They're posting for the position again," Cindy continued. "And between you and me, people are starting to talk. About how things ran more smoothly when you were here. About how much you actually handled that wasn't obvious until you were gone." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling something I hadn't experienced since the day I was fired. A sense of my own worth. For 2 weeks, I'd been drowning in self-doubt, wondering if I really had been as valuable as I'd believed. But the simple fact that my replacement had quit after 2 weeks suggested that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been imagining my contributions. That evening, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not job applications or cover letters, but a detailed analysis of every campaign I developed at Northbridge Creative. I documented the strategies, the results, the innovative approaches that had generated real value for clients. Not for any immediate purpose, but to remind myself of what I was capable of. As I wrote, something began shifting inside me. The fog of depression and self-doubt started lifting, replaced by something sharper and more focused. Anger, yes, but also determination. Quillan had bet that I was easily replaceable, that my contributions were insignificant. He was about to discover just how wrong he had been. Over the following days, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I could build. I started researching successful independent marketing consultants, studying how they had built their practices, learning about the growing trend of businesses hiring freelancers instead of large agencies. If Quillan thought anyone could do my job, I would prove him wrong in the most definitive way possible. I would build something that would make his agency look small and outdated by comparison. I would show every client he had taken credit for my work with exactly what they had been missing. The victim was disappearing, and in her place, something much more dangerous was emerging. A competitor who knew all his weaknesses and had nothing left to lose. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single moment of clarity that came to me during my morning coffee ritual 3 weeks after my termination. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open to yet another job posting that required, quote, 3 to 5 years agency experience with strong references from previous supervisors, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Ivory, this is Ragnar Reed from Sterling Heights Community Bank. Cindy Shaw gave me your number. We're looking for help with our social media strategy, and she said you might be available for consulting work. Would you be interested in discussing a project? I stared at the message for a full minute before it sank in. Ragnar Reed was the marketing director at one of the smaller banks in town. Not a Northbridge client, but someone who had clearly heard about my work through industry connections. More importantly, he was asking for my help as a consultant, not as an employee seeking permission from a supervisor. I called him back within 20 minutes. Ragnar, this is Ivory Finch. I got your text about the social media project. Ivory, thanks for calling back so quickly. Listen, I've been hearing your name around town for months. People keep talking about the incredible work you did for Westfield Financial. That campaign was brilliant. Our board has been pushing us to modernize our digital presence. And frankly, we need someone who understands how to make banking feel approachable without losing credibility. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. By the end, I had my first freelance client and a project that would pay more per week than I'd been making per month at Northbridge Creative. But more than the money, I had something I hadn't felt in years: complete creative control and full credit for my work. That evening, I called Lyra with news that made her squeal with excitement. Ivory, this is it, she said. This is your chance to build something that's entirely yours. No more credit-stealing bosses, no more having to downplay your contributions. You get to be the face of your own success. She was right. But the prospect was also terrifying. Building a freelance consulting practice meant more than just finding clients. It meant handling contracts, managing finances, marketing myself, and taking responsibility for every aspect of the business. I had spent 3 years developing strategies for other companies. Now I had to develop a strategy for myself. I spent the next week immersed in research and planning. I studied successful marketing consultants, analyzed their service offerings, and began developing what would become the foundation of my independent practice. The more I researched, the more excited I became about the possibilities. The traditional agency model that Quillan represented was becoming increasingly outdated. Small and medium-sized businesses were tired of paying inflated agency fees for work that was often delegated to junior staff members. They wanted direct access to senior-level expertise without the overhead and politics of large agencies. I created a business model that was everything Northbridge Creative wasn't: transparent, collaborative, and focused on genuine partnership rather than hierarchical client relationships. Instead of presenting myself as the mysterious expert who would disappear after delivering a strategy, I positioned myself as an embedded partner who would work alongside business owners to implement and optimize their digital marketing efforts. My first meeting with Ragnar Reed took place the following Monday at Sterling Heights Community Bank's main branch. I arrived with a comprehensive presentation that I had spent 3 days perfecting. Not because I didn't trust my expertise, but because I wanted to demonstrate the level of attention and care that his project would receive. Before we talk about tactics, I began, I want to understand your customers and your community. Banking is fundamentally about trust, and digital marketing for financial institutions needs to build that trust rather than undermining it. For the next hour, we talked about the bank's history, their customer demographics, and their challenges in competing with larger institutions. I asked questions that no one from Northbridge Creative had ever asked when working with Westfield Financial. Questions about community involvement, customer pain points, and the emotional aspects of financial decision-making. By the end of the meeting, I had developed a strategy that was completely different from anything I would have created at Northbridge. Instead of generic engagement content and broad demographic targeting, I proposed a hyper-local approach that would position Sterling Heights Community Bank as an integral part of the local business ecosystem. The strategy included partnering with local businesses to create cross-promotional content, developing financial education resources tailored to the community's specific needs, and implementing a customer story program that would showcase real people achieving their financial goals with the bank's support. This is exactly what we needed, Ragnar said as I wrapped up my presentation. You're not just thinking about social media posts. You're thinking about how digital marketing can strengthen our actual relationship with the community. 2 weeks later, the results spoke for themselves. The bank's social media engagement increased by 180% in the first week alone. More importantly, they saw a 60% increase in new account inquiries, with potential customers specifically mentioning that they had been impressed by the bank's community involvement and educational content. But the real validation came when Ragnar forwarded me an email from their board of directors, praising the, quote, innovative and thoughtful approach to their digital marketing and requesting a presentation about expanding the strategy to include their other branches. Word spreads quickly in a small market, and within a month I had 3 more clients. Each project was different, each required a customized approach, and each allowed me to demonstrate expertise that had been invisible when I was buried in the hierarchy of Northbridge Creative. Sylvan Beckett, who owned a chain of fitness studios, hired me after his previous marketing agency delivered a campaign that felt generic and impersonal. Working with him, I developed a strategy that focused on personal transformation stories and community building rather than typical fitness industry before and after photos. Cale Finch, whose family had been running a local restaurant group for 3 generations, brought me in when their traditional advertising approach stopped generating results. Together, we created a digital strategy that showcased their family history, their relationships with local suppliers, and the stories behind their signature dishes. Linda Croft, the woman who had quit trying to replace me at Northbridge Creative after 2 weeks, actually reached out to me for advice when she started her own freelance practice. During our coffee meeting, she confirmed what Cindy Shaw had told me and added details that were even more satisfying. "Ivory, I have to tell you, what you were doing at that agency was incredible," she said, stirring her latte nervously. "I thought I understood digital marketing, but the systems you had built, the relationship management, the strategic thinking behind every campaign." I was completely overwhelmed. She went on to describe the chaos that had followed my departure. Client campaigns that had run smoothly for years suddenly required constant troubleshooting. Content calendars that I had developed based on deep understanding of each brand's voice and timing became generic posting schedules that generated complaints from clients. The Hampton Hotel's marketing director actually asked Quillan if they could hire you directly as a consultant, Linda revealed. Apparently, their engagement rates dropped by 40% in the month after you left, and they noticed the difference immediately. This information was golden, but I filed it away for future reference rather than gloating. I was too busy building my own success to spend energy celebrating Quillan's failures. By the end of my 3rd month as an independent consultant, I was booked solid and had to start turning down potential clients. My monthly income had tripled compared to my Northbridge salary, but more importantly, I was working with business owners who valued my expertise and treated me as a strategic partner rather than a tactical implementer. I rented a small office space in downtown Sterling Heights. Nothing fancy, but professional enough to meet with clients and house the growing collection of awards and testimonials that my work was generating. The office was 3 blocks away from Northbridge Creative's building, a proximity that felt both coincidental and somehow destined. One afternoon, as I was leaving a client meeting at a coffee shop downtown, I ran into Perrin Vance from my former agency. He looked genuinely happy to see me, but also somewhat embarrassed. "Ivory, I heard you were doing really well with your consulting practice," he said, glancing around as if he was worried about being overheard. "I have to tell you, things haven't been the same since you left." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, and I meant it. I had genuinely liked Perrin and most of my former colleagues. "They're on their 3rd person trying to fill your position," he continued, lowering his voice. "After Linda quit, they hired someone from the capital city with supposedly more experience. She lasted 6 weeks before deciding the workload was quote, 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 quote. Now they have a temp agency person who keeps asking questions that make it obvious she doesn't understand what you were doing. 3 people. Just as the title of my story had promised, 3 people had tried and failed to replace me. The vindication was sweet, but it was overshadowed by excitement about what I was building. "The worst part," Perrin added, "is that clients are starting to ask questions. Some of the long-term accounts are wondering why their campaign results aren't what they used to be. Quillan keeps saying it's just a temporary adjustment period. But," he trailed off, but I understood what he wasn't saying. The sophisticated strategies I had developed, the deep client relationships I had built, the innovative approaches that had won awards, they weren't as easily transferable as Quillan had believed. That evening, I sat in my new office reviewing the proposals I was preparing for potential clients, and I realized something had fundamentally changed in how I thought about my career. For 3 years at Northbridge Creative, I had been trying to prove my worth to someone who was determined not to see it. Now, I was building relationships with people who hired me specifically because they recognized my value. The difference was transformative. Instead of downplaying my expertise to avoid threatening a insecure boss, I was positioning myself as the expert that clients needed. Instead of watching my innovations be attributed to agency collaboration, I was building a reputation based on documented results that bore my name. But perhaps most importantly, I was learning that my collaborative approach and preference for authentic relationships, the very qualities that Quillan had dismissed as weaknesses, were actually my greatest competitive advantages in the consulting world. Small business owners didn't want to work with agencies that treated them like account numbers. They wanted partners who would listen to their concerns, understand their unique challenges, and develop strategies that reflected their values and goals. My ability to build genuine relationships and create customized solutions wasn't a limitation. It was exactly what the market needed. 6 months after being fired for being easily replaceable, I had built a consulting practice that was generating more revenue than my former salary, working with clients who valued my expertise, and most satisfying of all, watching my former agency struggle to replicate what I had made look effortless. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Building a successful practice was just the first phase of what I had come to think of as my larger strategy. I wanted more than professional vindication. I wanted Quillan Thorne to understand, in the most public and undeniable way possible, exactly how wrong he had been about my value. The opportunity for that final demonstration was about to present itself in a way that would exceed even my most ambitious plans for revenge. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 8 months after Quillan Thorne had told me that anyone could do my job. I was in my downtown office, reviewing analytics reports for my growing roster of clients, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Ivory Finch Consulting, this is Ivory. Ms. Finch, this is Mayor Patricia Hawthorne from the Sterling Heights Chamber of Commerce. I hope you remember me from the economic development presentation earlier this year. My heart skipped a beat. I remembered her perfectly. She had been part of the committee that heard Quillan present my digital strategies as his own innovative thinking. Of course, Mayor Hawthorne. How can I help you? Well, that's actually a somewhat delicate situation, she said, her tone suggesting she was choosing her words carefully. As you may know, we awarded the downtown revitalization contract to Northbridge Creative Agency back in February. Unfortunately, the results have been disappointing. I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. The digital marketing component of the campaign has been particularly problematic. Engagement rates are well below projections, the messaging feels generic and unfocused, and frankly, we're not seeing the community response we were promised. Several business owners have complained that the social media content doesn't reflect the authentic character of our downtown district. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The campaign I had designed, the one Quillan had stolen and presented as his own, was failing because he couldn't execute the nuanced strategy that made it work. I'm sorry to hear you're having difficulties, I replied carefully. The truth is, Ms. Finch, we've been hearing incredible things about your independent consulting work. The results you achieved for Sterling Heights Community Bank and several other local businesses have been remarkable. We're wondering if you might be available to consult on improving our current campaign. This was better than anything I could have imagined. Not only was I being asked to fix the very project that had led to my termination, but the request was coming directly from the client who had originally been impressed by my work. I'd be very interested in discussing how I might help, I said. When would be convenient for a meeting? We scheduled a meeting for Thursday afternoon at City Hall. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of anticipation mixed with strategic satisfaction. This wasn't just another consulting opportunity. This was the chance to demonstrate, in the most public way possible, exactly how wrong Quillan had been about my replaceability. The meeting with the Chamber of Commerce exceeded my expectations. Mayor Hawthorne was joined by 3 other committee members, all of whom expressed frustration with Northbridge Creative's performance. The proposal we received was brilliant, explained David Chen, the Economic Development Director. Innovative, sophisticated, exactly what we were looking for. But the execution has been completely different. It's like they presented one strategy and then implemented something entirely generic. Because they did, I thought to myself. Quillan had presented my strategy but had no idea how to execute the complex, nuanced approach that made it effective. Could you walk me through what's been implemented so far? I asked. For the next hour, they showed me months of social media content, analytics reports, and marketing materials that bore no resemblance to the sophisticated strategy I had developed. The content was generic, the messaging was unfocused, and the community engagement approach had been replaced with standard promotional posts that generated minimal response. This is definitely fixable, I said finally, but I'd recommend a complete strategic overhaul rather than trying to patch the current approach. Would you be open to that level of revision? At this point, we're open to anything that will get us the results we were promised, Mayor Hawthorne replied. I spent the next week developing a comprehensive rescue plan for the downtown revitalization campaign. It was, essentially, the same strategy I had originally created, but refined and improved based on 8 months of experience running my own consulting practice. The presentation I prepared was thorough, professional, and included detailed case studies from my recent client work that demonstrated exactly the kind of community engagement and authentic storytelling the Chamber wanted to achieve. The day of my presentation, I arrived at City Hall 15 minutes early, carrying my materials and wearing a confidence that felt natural rather than forced. As I sat up in the conference room, I reflected on how different this felt from my last presentation experience at Northbridge Creative. This time, I wasn't asking for permission to present my own work. I wasn't worried about someone else taking credit for my ideas. I was here as a recognized expert, invited specifically because of my demonstrated expertise and track record of success. The presentation went flawlessly. I walked the committee through my strategic recommendations, showed them examples of successful implementations from my other clients, and answered their questions with the depth of knowledge that comes from having actually developed and executed these types of campaigns personally. This is exactly what we were expecting from the original contract, David Chen said when I finished. How quickly could you implement these changes? I could have the first phase launched within 2 weeks, I replied. Full implementation would take about 6 weeks, and you'd start seeing improved results almost immediately. What about working alongside the current agency? Mayor Hawthorne asked. We're still under contract with Northbridge Creative. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I'm certainly willing to collaborate with other agencies, I said diplomatically. Though I should mention that optimal results typically come from having clear strategic leadership and consistent implementation. The committee exchanged glances that suggested they understood exactly what I was implying. We'll need to discuss this internally and determine the best path forward, Mayor Hawthorne said. But I want you to know that we're very impressed with your proposal. 3 days later, I received a call that was even more satisfying than I had dared to hope. Ms. Finch, this is Mayor Hawthorne. We've made a decision about the downtown revitalization campaign. We'd like to terminate our current contract with Northbridge Creative and hire you to take over the project entirely. I managed to keep my voice professional despite the euphoria I felt. I'm honored by your confidence in my work. I'll prepare a contract proposal for your review. There's one more thing, she added. We'll need to have a transition meeting with the current agency to ensure continuity. Would you be available to attend that meeting? A transition meeting, where I would sit across the table from Quillan Thorne as the expert consultant who was replacing his agency on the very project that had led to my termination. Where he would have to watch the client he had tried to impress with my stolen ideas formally fire him in favor of working with me directly. Absolutely, I said. I'm available whenever is convenient. The transition meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the Chamber of Commerce conference room. I arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of confident professionalism that comes from being hired specifically for your expertise rather than being tolerated despite your contributions. Quillan arrived 5 minutes late, accompanied by whoever was currently attempting to fill my former position, a woman I didn't recognize who looked stressed and unprepared. His expression when he saw me sitting at the conference table was everything I had imagined it would be: shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Ivory, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I didn't realize you were involved in this project. Miss Finch is our new strategic consultant for the downtown revitalization campaign, Mayor Hawthorne explained before I could respond. We've decided to make some changes to our approach, and we wanted to ensure a smooth transition. I watched Quillan process this information, watched him understand that the client he had tried to impress by stealing my work was now firing him in favor of hiring me directly. The irony was so perfect it almost felt fictional. I see, he said finally. May I ask what prompted this decision? David Chen answered with a directness that made me respect him even more. Frankly, the results we've been getting don't match what we were promised in your original presentation. We need someone who can deliver the sophisticated digital strategy we thought we were purchasing. The meeting proceeded with painful efficiency. I outlined my strategic recommendations while Quillan sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence. When the committee asked technical questions about implementation, he had to defer to his current employee, who clearly didn't understand the complexities of what she was being asked. Ms. Finch, Mayor Hawthorne said as the meeting was winding down, your original strategy proposal was remarkably sophisticated. Did you develop that independently? It was a loaded question, and I suspect she already knew the answer. But it gave me the perfect opportunity to reclaim ownership of my work in front of the person who had stolen it. Yes, I replied, meeting Quillan's eyes directly. I spent several weeks developing that comprehensive approach based on extensive research into successful downtown revitalization campaigns. It's actually very similar to the methodology I've been using with my consulting clients over the past 8 months. Quillan's face went pale. He understood that his theft was being exposed, but he couldn't challenge my statement without admitting that he hadn't developed the strategy himself. After the chamber committee left the conference room, Quillan and I found ourselves alone for the first time since the day he fired me. The woman who had been attempting to replace me had hurried out, clearly eager to escape the awkward situation. Ivory, Quillan began, his voice lacking its usual commanding confidence. I hope you understand that the decision to end your employment was purely professional. I looked at him across the conference table. This man who had systematically stolen credit for my work, who had gaslit me into doubting my own contributions, who had told me that anyone could do my job, and I felt something I had never expected to feel in his presence. Pity. You're absolutely right, Quillan, I said calmly. It was professional. You made a professional decision based on your professional judgment about my value to your organization. He seemed relieved by my response, perhaps thinking I was going to graciously accept his version of events. The results speak for themselves, I continued. You believed anyone could do what I was doing. You've now had 3 different people attempt to replace me, and from what I understand, none of them lasted more than 6 weeks. The campaign I designed has been failing under your agency's implementation for 8 months, and now the client is firing you in favor of hiring me directly. I stood up and gathered my materials, enjoying the rare experience of having Quillan Thorne speechless. So you were right. It was purely professional. And professionally, you were completely wrong about my value. I paused at the door and turned back to him one final time. By the way, in case you're wondering how anyone could do my job, I'm now charging 3 times what you were paying me. I'm booked solid for the next 6 months, and I have a waiting list of clients who specifically want to work with me. It turns out that when you stop trying to make yourself small to accommodate someone else's insecurity, people are very willing to pay for genuine expertise. As I walked out of that conference room, leaving Quillan alone with the wreckage of his assumptions about my replaceability, I felt a completion that went beyond professional vindication. I had not only proven my worth, I had built something better than what I had lost. The downtown revitalization campaign launched 6 weeks later to extraordinary results. Within 2 months, foot traffic in the downtown district increased by 45%, new business inquiries rose by 70%, and the social media engagement that had been struggling under Northbridge Creative's management increased by over 300%. But the sweetest victory came 3 months later, when I received a call from Hampton Hotels asking if I would be available to handle their account directly. Apparently, they had terminated their contract with Northbridge Creative after months of declining performance and wanted to work with the consultant who really understood their brand. I accepted their contract, of course, and when I ran into Cindy Shaw at a coffee shop the following week, she filled me in on the aftermath at my former agency. Quillan's been telling everyone that you somehow stole the Chamber of Commerce account, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. But people aren't buying it anymore. 3 major clients have left in the past 4 months, and word is getting around that the agency's digital capabilities aren't what they used to be. She paused, then added with a small smile. He's had to take on a lot more of the day-to-day work himself since he can't seem to keep anyone in your old position. Turns out that delegating strategic thinking is a lot harder when you don't actually understand the strategy yourself. I smiled, but I felt no malice toward my former colleagues. They had been caught in the crossfire of Quillan's insecurity and poor leadership, but most of them were good people who deserved better. "What about you?" I asked. "Are you looking for other opportunities?" "Actually," Cindy said, "I was hoping you might have some time to talk. I've been thinking about making a change, and I'd love to learn more about consulting work." 6 months later, Cindy Shaw became my first business partner, and together we've built something that neither of us could have achieved within the constraints of traditional agency hierarchy. We work with clients who value our expertise, we get credit for our innovations, and most importantly, we've created an environment where collaboration enhances individual contributions rather than erasing them. The lesson I learned through this experience isn't just about standing up to toxic bosses or fighting for recognition. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued isn't to argue or plead for fair treatment. It's to build something so successful that the undervaluation becomes obviously absurd. Quillan Thorne taught me something valuable, though he never intended to. When someone consistently refuses to see your worth, the problem isn't with your worth. The problem is with their vision. And sometimes, the best way to correct someone's vision is to build something so bright, so successful, so undeniably valuable, that they can't possibly miss it. Today, when people ask me about the key to building a successful consulting practice, I tell them it's not about being the loudest voice in the room or the most aggressive self-promoter. It's about being so good at what you do, so reliable in your results, and so genuine in your relationships that your work speaks louder than any voice ever could. Because it turns out that when you stop trying to prove your worth to people who are determined not to see it, and start demonstrating your value to people who are eager to recognize it, amazing things become possible. And if anyone ever tells you that anyone could do your job, just smile and remember, they're about to give you the greatest gift possible: the motivation to prove just how irreplaceable you really are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.